Hello, welcome to the second in the series of panels for final year medical students who have just passed the OSCE. If you remember, these final year medical students have the perfect score, so they failed 0 of the 12 OSCE stations, and these students were randomly selected from the 79 or 80 students who got that perfect score. So thank you Mohit, Jemma and Clara for joining us. And we'll just might kick away with the questions now.
So, first question, because I'm a third year student and never done any OSCEs before, and so I have absolutely no idea how to prepare, so perhaps someone could tell me how you go about preparing for an OSCE.
So I found I was quite prepared for the fourth year OSCEs because I'd done OSCEs in third year, and I prepared well for the third year OSCE. And so those skills do carry through. You studied well for the third year and you remember those skills for the fourth year OSCEs, so that's quite helpful. In terms of how I prepared, let's take this year for example, I perhaps started having different study groups from about June, and so I'd have one study group with 2 other girls, a study group with another person, and then a bigger study group with about 10 of us. And I think having different study groups meant that you could get different opinions, different sort of techniques, and learn from lots of different people, and I found that quite helpful. But also having the consistency in the groups so we knew what we covered and didn't overlap too much and sort of repeat stuff that we felt unnecessary. We would do perhaps an hour a week of OSCE practice and just run through past stations that have happened, and we would even write stations for each other, and that became sort of a little bit more frequent in the couple of months leading up to exams this year.
Yeah, I probably agree with Clara in that we prepared quite well for third year exams, and so once we had all passed those, we knew that our kind of strategy or approach would work and it was going to be successful. So we used the same kind of tactics in fourth year. We had a group of 4 of us, and we started after the end of the first rotation, so 5 weeks into the year, which I think was maybe about the start of March, middle of March. And from March until about the end of June, we met twice a week. And we all brought 2 stations and had marking keys, and we would also do a 5 to 6 slide PowerPoint on the topic of our station. And we tried to make it really high yield teaching points for that topic. And over the year we uploaded all these to a shared Google Drive, and by the end of the year we had a drive with kind of over 150 stations that either we'd written or taken from past years, as well as corresponding PowerPoints with all the high yield information that we could go back over. And then once we hit July, we kind of amped it up and we're doing maybe 3 times a week. And then in the month leading up to the OSCE, so for all of September, we did 2 full mock OSCEs twice a week. So we had 12 stations, and we had the triggers on the door, we had the triggers in the room, and we went between doors as well. We had the whistles going and it was fully timed. So yeah, I guess very similar to Clara in that we had a group that was quite structured and functioned quite well. And we just did a lot of stations. And now we've got a huge drive of all that material as well, which was quite helpful at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. I think I didn't have sort of that many study groups, and we didn't practice as often as you guys did. I had one study group, and we met infrequently, like once every 3 weeks or something, if we were bothered to meet. And we would do, maybe one person would do a topic, and it was like some person did like a pediatric topic, even though it wasn't really a part of our OSCEs, but just whatever we were interested in and passionate about, we would just talk about that. And really, I didn't start doing actual OSCE practice with that group until it was maybe 2 or 3 months before the OSCEs. I think that's when we were starting to feel the pressure. So we started to obviously ramp up, and I think practice is a common thread. Practicing with other people, practicing with groups. So I practiced with my main study group, and I also practiced with a couple of closer friends. And I try to practice individually with different friends to see, what feedback they could give me, and just getting used to different examiners, and even practicing with people who are not your friends. So people that are familiar acquaintances with, I practice with them just so, because you behave differently around your friends versus if you have a consultant or someone sitting there marking you at the OSCEs. And in terms of, I had a really weird way of practicing. I like group work, but I also like studying by myself. So the way that I would do it is I would have OSCE stations or previous OSCE stations, and I would sit there and time myself, and I would just basically sit there at my desk and talk through what I wanted to ask and my approach to the station. So I'd look and I'd go, okay, this is the shortness of breath station, without necessarily having someone there be the patient and be like, okay, shortness of breath, so this is what I think is important, this is what I want to ask, this is how I want to ask it, these are my management priorities. I sort of had a structure of how I would take notes. So I had like 4 boxes, and so one box would be my differentials on seeing the trigger, one box would be my presenting complaint, one box would be things I shouldn't miss on my social/past medical history, and one box would be my management. So I did that sort of, more and so alone in a way, and I would always have that timer there. And then once the time ran out, then I would go through the marking key and I'd say, oh, this is what I missed. So I did a lot of that before I went into group practice. And I think that's the main thing that I've done differently from you guys. But
I actually found that quite helpful as well, especially in the lead up just before the OSCE, where you've had enough of studying with your friends and you just kind of need some time to study and run through things by yourself, and just having the trigger there and to be like, in that 2 minutes, what are the differentials that I need to think about, what can I get from this trigger, and write on my page and sort of have that approach, and that's good practice as well.
Yeah, we did actually also do that, now that you guys say it. We had, I think, up to maybe 2002, we had all the previous stations of like varying levels of detail on the trigger. But yeah, did the same thing, and it kind of meant that, I'm sure you guys probably felt the same, when we walked into each station in the OSCE, nothing was a surprise. We'd seen either the almost exact same station or a station that was very similar structure, and you knew or you could anticipate what was going to come up and probably what was going to be on the marking key. And on the day you kind of got to the point where you felt like, I've seen the last 20 years of OSCEs, how many more surprises or how much new content would they really throw at us? And you kind of see patterns in the stuff that comes up a lot as well, and so you know to really nail that stuff down.
So can I ask you, were you guys mainly writing your own questions or using online resources or other resources?
I think in third year I used a lot of online resources, but then I found that, my friends knew what the high yield stations were, I knew what the high yield stations were, and so it was just better if we wrote our own stations. Because it tests us, it means that we revise all the content that should be on the marking guide, and it also gives all of that information to our friends, which they can revise after.
Yeah, I'd say that out of the 150 stations we accumulated, probably 130 of them we'd written ourselves, which takes more time, but as Clara said, it meant you kind of worked out what might be on the marking key. It kind of forced you to deep dive on the topic a little bit, and we also made PowerPoint slides, so that helped. But we also tried to be quite harsh on each other, and I think once getting our marks back, we probably realised that we probably marked each other a lot harder than what the markers did in the exam, and probably had high expectations of each other.
So I didn't write any of my stations. I think I was a bit too lazy for that. And I do agree that going through and actually writing a marking key teaches you so much. So if you're that type of learner, but I use a lot of online stations. So there's like OSCE frameworks, OSCE Bank. But the one thing I did realise with those sort of online stations was that they were quite specific to a diagnosis. Like you'd know from the trigger what the diagnosis was. Whereas I personally felt in the UWA OSCEs, the stations were very vague and non-specific. So there was a lot of room, this is what I personally felt, there's a lot of room for, am I on the right track here? This is very different from the online stations that I've done. I sort of got that vibe. So I think if I could go back and sort of tell myself, what I would change, it'd be sort of how to prepare for things that are vague and that you don't get the diagnosis at the first bit, which I got that vibe from the UWA stations this year.
Yeah, a lot of the online ones are all history focused, and I think from memory in our OSCE there was maybe 4 of 12 stations had histories in them, roughly.
Yeah. I think I got bored with the online ones because they were purely sort of diagnoses, whereas there's a lot of counselling and just other stuff that comes up in the actual OSCE.
Yeah, I guess you've talked about like things that you're really well prepared for, and certainly as somebody, as an MD3 that's not done any OSCEs before, my question is, do you have a strategy for any stations you might come up against that you really felt you were quite underprepared for?
Anything.
Yeah. I think using that trigger time to go back to your basics and take a deep breath, and think about your structure. Whether it's an exam, go back to, I don't know, look, listen, feel, or look, feel, move. There's all these sort of really quite basic things, history, exam, investigation. Just go back to your basics, and you really can work your way through that marking guide and get enough marks to pass regardless of what the station is.
Yeah, and I think also the main thing they want to know is, are you safe? And so if you are feeling lost outside the room and you're looking at the trigger, trying to think about things that you need to tick off to show that you would be a safe intern. Like saying that I would call a senior and things like that, because those are things that if you miss are, potentially going to be a problem. But also the other thing is that if the diagnosis is something rogue, and we were told this over and over again by like faculty members as well, is that if the diagnosis is something rogue and you don't get it, it won't be an automatic fail if it's a rogue diagnosis or something that's quite rare. It's like if you miss a rare cardiac condition but you've taken a really good history and done a really good exam or whatnot, you're probably still going to be fine, versus if you miss the STEMI on an ECG, which is a really common condition, you're in trouble. So I think a lot of the revision lectures given by faculty towards the end of the year kind of kept going over that if don't get so bogged down if you can't find the diagnosis in your history, go through those steps and be structured. You just need to know those big, common, dangerous things really well, because they're the ones that if you miss, it's a problem. Whereas the less common stuff is probably okay as long as you're safe and structured.
So I completely agree with everything you've said, and the one thing I'd add to it is that there's an art to not knowing something and walking into a station that you're not prepared for, because look, you can't cover everything. You have a certain amount of time, so it's really about learning. If I do get hit by a station, and I did, this happen in my OSCE, I got hit by a station and I couldn't remember the exact diagnosis. So what I did in that station was I really made explicit my rationale for what I think is happening to the marker. So I was honest, I said, I don't know what's going on. I don't actually know what's going on, but I believe it's this, because this patient is this. So in that way, even though you don't know the diagnosis or you don't know what's going on, you're really still showing to the examiner that you're thinking about the case. And always, I think honesty is a good thing. So you can say, I don't know, but I'll check. I'll check on ETG, I'll check on UpToDate, I'll check with my seniors, because in an actual hospital setting, you have a lot of support. So I think there's an art to knowing how to face the unknown in a way, like unknown images. I think for one of the practice ones, we had was it an abdo? It was and I have rarely seen those. I wasn't too confident, but just walk through it systematically and have an approach to something that's unknown, and you should be able to get through it. I think that's one of the tips I give.
And not getting so bogged down in the reaction of the marker as well, because if you feel like you don't know something and you're stressed, a lot of the time the marker's just staring at you with a straight face going, and what else? And I think if you play into that and you allow that to throw you off, you do yourself a disservice. I don't look at the marker in the eye. I generally will look at them, but I don't look directly into their eyes. And I almost kind of pretend that they're not there. In some stations they're sitting behind you and you can't see them, but there are ones where they are the actual patient. And so you're trying to have a conversation with them, take a history from them while they're scribbling on your marking sheet that you can almost see your mark on. So trying not to focus on that stuff and not buy into their reactions as well is, again, probably an art to just remaining calm. Because a lot of the time they're actually giving you really good marks and they're acting like you are so stupid, and you walk out of the room going, wow, they thought I was dumb, and it turns out that you did completely fine in the station and you got the same thing as everyone else. It's
like the little things, like when time runs out, right? A lot of people will be really flustered, I ran out of time. But there's an art to running out of time. And if the time runs out, you take a deep breath, and you go, thank the patient, we couldn't complete this consultation, thank you for your time, wishing you all the best, and then you walk out the room. So it's the little things to show that you're confident, and the marker will think, okay, if this person had enough time, they would have completed the consultation properly. And I think that is reflected in the global score. So I think there's an art to that too.
Did you have any, I know you sort of touched on this, about staying calm and collected during the OSCE. Do you have any further tips on how to go about keeping your cool during what is...
I think the best phrase is fake it till you make it. And I think walking in with confidence, it gives you confidence and it gives a good impression to the marker and the patient. And the patient's obviously important. You get an empathy score as well. If they like you, then the examiner's likely to like you as well. And it makes you feel more confident. And I think there is a tendency to speak quite fast, and if you slow down, then you feel more calm, everyone feels more calm, and you can sort of self-soothe yourself during the OSCE. And then at the end, I think really summing up well is, you know, walking out and making sure you say thank you and thank both the patient and the examiner, and that just gives a really good impression. Also, to remain calm sort of during the OSCE, just remember that there is a few sections, and if you do screw up one, then you haven't lost all the marks. That's just one section, and so you can move on to the next and move on to the next, and really make up enough marks. And remember that you can make up those marks elsewhere, and it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think the more times you put yourself in those high pressure situations and practice under OSCE conditions, the better off you are. And yeah, probably following on from Clara, just going slowly, taking deep breaths. I probably don't have very good advice for this. I'm quite good at just shutting out. I don't really think about the situation. I can be quite tunnel visioned. And I was quite tunnel visioned for the 3 hours we were in the OSCE, and then it was over and I was kind of oh, that went quite quickly. Whereas I know there are other people who do struggle with getting worked up and stressed. I probably don't have a lot of help to give. I don't really.
I think smile as well.
Yeah.
Because it makes you happy, it makes everyone else happy, and it just sort of gives the illusion that you're confident.
And try not to as well, I don't know if it'll be the same next year, but we had a lot of rest stations this year. So we had 12 stations and 6 rest stations. So there's a lot of time where if you are walking out of a station where maybe you feel you haven't done quite so well and you just have to sit there for the next 10 minutes, I think it's important not to then sit there and dwell and kind of work yourself up before going into the next room. I personally find it easier when you're just going from room to room to room. You don't have time to think about it. So I think in those rest stations, you just need to be able to sit there, take a deep breath, calm down. If you need to scribble or draw on your piece of paper, draw for 5 minutes. Or if you need to write notes for the next station because you know that something hasn't come up and you're like, oh, well, I just want to write down a quick structure to this. Or I think trying not to dwell on what's happened in those rest stations is quite important.
I agree with everything you guys have said, especially the putting yourself in high stress situations is a great way to prepare for the OSCE. I'm the type of person, I'm very similar in that I can, when I'm in the moment, I tend to shut things out, but I have a lot of anxiety before the OSCE, and a couple of my friends do, and sort of the way I sort of rationalized it was, the OSCEs are highly sort of, not convoluted, but they're sort of fake in a way. They're trying to simulate the clinical environment, but they're not always going to simulate it perfectly. And so how I perform the OSCEs for me is not necessarily an indicator of how I would perform on the ward or in a hospital, where I would have more time, where I wouldn't be having a consultant sort of staring at the back of my neck sort of thing. So I sort of rationalized the OSCE like that. So when I went into the OSCE, I'm like, okay, it's no big deal. Even if I fail a couple of stations, it's fine. There's always the supplementary OSCEs, and this doesn't reflect who I am as a clinician. Whether I did that accurately or not, but I think that helped me a lot before the OSCE, and then when you're in the OSCE, sort of, I can shut everything out.
So you and Jemma both talked about replicating that stress so that it's easy in the OSCE. How can you do that beyond doing practice OSCEs? Was there any other way that you...
Well, I guess we did those full mock OSCEs, so we had whistles going and you had to move between doors and the trigger was on the wall, and we tried to really sit there and be quite stone-faced to each other. We also had some friends who either had family members or partners who are registrars or RMOs, and we did do some stuff with them as markers, and they were quite good at terrifying us as well, especially when they're people that you know. So we did make use of them a few times, and as I said, we tried to be quite harsh on each other, so we kind of tried to not give each other gimme marks because we were like, oh, we knew what you meant, but we tried to be quite harsh in the way that we marked each other. Yeah.
I think doing OSCEs in a row is a big thing because OSCE fatigue exists, and it's I wasn't used to it, and doing like three stations in a row, you just get tired. And I remember one thing after doing those 12 stations was I was exhausted. So I think really preparing yourself, doing stations in a row, because one station you might do quite poorly in, or you feel like you did quite poorly in. It's about gathering yourself and moving on to the next station, and that requires some practice too. So doing stations in a row, I think really helped with that.
I think also practicing even on the wards, presenting to consultants and regs, because it's not dissimilar to an OSCE situation. Like all the people marking you are either consultants or regs generally. And so I know that some people, if they get put on the spot, will kind of go, oh, no, that's okay, I won't do it. I think the more often you go, yeah, I'll give it a go, or I'll try to present, or sure, I'll take a history of this patient who I've never seen before in front of the consultant who's been seeing them every day for 3 weeks. I think the more times you kind of like let yourself be put in that situation, you become a little bit numb to it almost, and you become more okay with being told that wasn't good.
Jim, I'm glad you said that, because that's what I've always thought. The more times you put yourself in those pressure situations on the wards, you'll get used to that kind of stress.
Yeah, and I think making the most of your ED rotation next year is probably a big one for that. I think ED is a rotation next year where it's very easy to either kind of blur into the background and just follow the intern around, and then the intern will present to the reg who's, the head of the ED at the moment. Whereas I think if you kind of embrace it and you go see the patients on your own, and then you present to the reg or you present to the consultant, and the consultant is relying on what you tell them, and obviously they go and check everything. But I think I found it to be a good rotation where you could do you're on a 10-hour shift, so you can do a lot of histories and do a lot of presentations in that time. And if you make the most of it, you get quite good and quite quick at doing it as well.
Can I ask, did any of you record yourself at all and look at yourself? Was that a technique anyone used? No?
I don't know.
Too confronting, or you didn't see the value?
I think I found it better just to actually do the practice. I mean, it might have been useful to watch myself once, and I might have done it once in third year and hated it. But I found sort of just the practicing, and I could sort of self-reflect after, and I knew what I hadn't done well, and I could improve off that.
We had quite a good relationship of just being brutally honest to each other. So we would say, you had a really bad tick, or you kept saying this one line over and over again every time you didn't know what to say. That was kind of how we did it.
Could you tell us a bit about the best resources that you used? You have mentioned a few different things, but maybe if you could summarise and give a little bit more information about that would be useful.
Yeah, I don't really know any ones that we kind of consistently use. I did the ortho talk the other night, and I said this isn't necessarily OSCE related, but more X-ray related. Radiology masterclass, their tutorials and their galleries were really good.
Yeah, so I think one thing that I struggled with the most was the first station that I came to on the day of the OSCE. And it was quite a simple station. It was just a history, ECG, and then further investigations. But I think because I hadn't warmed up and I wasn't quite in the medicine mindset, and you've just been waiting an hour with everyone sort of making small talk, and you aren't quite switched on, you have to, really think quite quickly. So I don't really know how to approach that, and whether it's perhaps take a history that morning with a friend, or do an OSCE station that morning. But just, make sure you try and switch on. And then following on from that, again, it was sort of, the first bit that I screwed up, and just remembering that you've got the rest of the station to go, and taking a deep breath, and, just continuing on from there, and it'll be okay.
As far as the morning, I was in the afternoon session, so I had a lot of time before the OSCE. There probably isn't anything that I would change in terms of what I did before the OSCE. And probably not so much during the OSCE either. I think for me it's more when I walk out, I can stand there and I'll go over every single thing that I missed afterwards, not during the OSCE, but because I'm quite good at shutting it all out, but afterwards. And then for the 2 weeks until we got our results, I was kind of thinking about all the things that I was I should have done that better, or I didn't say that, or I knew that, why did I not say it at the time? And there's always things that you forget. And so I'm probably overly critical of myself in the period after the OSCE. But in terms of before the OSCE and during the OSCE, I'm not sure that there's anything that I could have done to change that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the time goes so fast, you know, it feels like, you know, you're done. I think before the OSCEs, don't change your routine, don't do anything different. Know where you're going, get there early, I think is, you know, saves a lot of stress, especially you can't predict traffic and trains and all that, and get there early. Usually you might know some people there, so just have a chat with them. Don't talk about OSCEs, talk about something else, like what's your plan for, you know, the holidays, or you must be pretty excited. And then after the OSCEs, I think, you know, we loved to, whenever we met up, we would talk about the OSCE station. So I think one of my friends, he wasn't me, but he was like, oh, I don't want to talk about the OSCEs at all. So whenever we're together, don't talk about OSCEs. And I think that really helped. Like we wouldn't let the topic wander to OSCEs and what we should have done, because there's no way you can change it now. So I think if you get overly anxious about that, then that's probably a good idea.
What would you have done differently in your preparation though throughout the year, in hindsight, now that you've sat the OSCE, know that you've done well? What could you have got rid of, or what could you have done to get an even better score, do you think?
I think I was quite comfortable with the study that I did. I mean, everyone does things differently and it works for everyone. I know, like, I would have done quite a lot more than other people might have done, but what I did worked for me and it made me feel confident going in. So I think do whatever, you know, you think is going to work for you. And like Mohit was saying, I think preparing for the writtens, you're studying for the OSCE and vice versa. So whether you're doing sort of flashcards or OSCE stations, just do enough preparation and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think similar to Clara, I think we got to the point where we were confident that we had done enough. And I still think this, knowing my marks now, that even if I had done another 4 weeks of preparation, I don't think my mark would have changed substantially. There's always going to be things on the day that you mess up. Like, there are multiple things that I'd walk out of the room and be like, I missed something that I very clearly know that I probably would have remembered in not such a high stressful situation, but, you know, that's kind of the game of OSCEs. And so we were quite comfortable in that sense that I don't think that any more study would have improved my mark dramatically. I think we probably could have done a bit less work and probably gotten something quite similar, but then you end up in a point where you might be walking into the OSCE going, oh, I could have done more, I should have done more. And I didn't feel that. On the day, I was quite comfortable thinking that we had done enough, we knew enough, any more was going to be, you know, not any more beneficial. And I'm probably now sitting in a position where I don't have any regrets about thinking, oh, we should have started earlier, or we should have done more of this or that. Where if we had done less, maybe I would think that, or maybe, have doubts.
I think I'm similar. You know, in terms of content, I don't think I could have, because a lot of the stuff I would have missed, I would have never studied anyway, sort of thing. But I think one thing I would have gone back, and I've mentioned this before, is I'd like to know more about how to prepare for stations that I don't have studied, that I haven't studied, sort of thing, and especially how to deal with the vague stations. If I maybe had some form of structure for that, I would go back and tell myself, okay, here's a good structure for a station that I'm not sure what to do, you know, and if I could just fall back, because that happened to me a couple of times in the OSCEs where I wasn't sure what to do because the station trigger was itself really vague, and I sort of half-heartedly, you know, just did it spontaneously. But if I had a structure to fall back on, I would have definitely created a structure before the OSCEs.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like an answer to my heats thing. Our group, maybe 2 weeks before the OSCE, we sat down as a group for a few hours, and we had already gone through like every past OSCE that we had access to, and we wrote a list of every single kind of OSCE structure. So counselling on a condition, counselling on a medication, breaking bad news, all of that stuff. And we wrote out, as a group, we came up with what we thought was the ideal approach to that station. And so I think recognising what the station is actually asking of you, even if you don't know the actual content, is quite important, because if you can recognise that, okay, well, this station wants me to break a diagnosis and then explain the management to the patient, as long as you have a structure for your management, you know, and if you get to the point where you need to describe to them when to take their medication and you don't know, you can say, look, this medication will have to be taken at a certain time of day and may or may not need to be taken with food. I'll check that before we send you home today. And the marker can go, okay, well, she doesn't know exactly, but she knows that she needs to tell the patient. And that's where it comes down to being safe as well. So we came up with approaches to that. to every station. We had a huge PowerPoint slide, and yeah, that's kind of how we did it. So we made sure we had a structure for anything we thought might come up.
Can I ask some of the listeners who are in third year, and it's getting very close to the third year OSCE, what was your approach to third year OSCE different, or was it? Last week we had someone who didn't prepare at all.
Yeah, Kate. Yeah, she was in our study group this year. But last year, minus Kate, we had the same study group. And we did the same thing, but we started a little bit later. So I think this year we started in March. I think last year we might have started in May or June, like more midway through the year. But we did do the same thing. The three of us brought cases twice a week. We did PowerPoint slides. The third year OSCE isn't quite so varied in that there's a lot more histories. Like there's not quite so much other stuff. So that was more of a focus of our preparation. But I would say the three of us basically did the exact same thing on a slightly less hyper state. But we can't take credit for that structure because there was a group of now interns the year ahead of us who that was actually their approach. And they had told us about it and we thought, oh, well, that sounded good. So when they were in fourth year, we mimicked them in third year. And it worked for them in fourth year and it worked for us in third year. So we then did it again as fourth years. So we can't take complete credit. But yeah, we did do the same thing in third year. We didn't do full OSCEs before the week before. That was something we just did in fourth year. But we did do the slides and the stations and the approaches to things. And I would probably say that in the end, that was maybe our strength. We were all quite good at, in stations where we didn't know the diagnosis or we didn't know the answer, we were quite structured. And it became almost like a little bit of like subconscious. You had certain lines that you would just say when you weren't sure what was going on to keep you on track.
I think if you are a week out from the third year OSCEs, you know what the high yield things are. So orthopedics, know how to read an x-ray and the management for that, surgical management, obstetrics, know how to counsel on, the various obstetric things or contraception, pediatrics, know the high yield pediatric conditions, and sort of write your list, make sure you're comfortable counselling these things, have a look at the past stations, and honestly, if you do that, then you might come up with one station which challenges you, but the majority of them you should really be able to approach.
I think, so just want to ask, is MD3 OSCEs this year a barrier for these guys?
No.
Yeah, sorry. So that's sort of my approach to MD3 OSCEs. I think most of my friends did this too. We basically crammed like the week before lecture slides. We did no face-to-face or OSCE preparation because this was our first OSCEs that we've ever had. And once we did the OSCE session, we managed to pass. But I think the MD3 OSCEs, I sort of used it as it highlighted to me what was important for the MD4 OSCEs. Like one of the things I picked up was that my time management was very poor in the MD3 OSCEs because I ran out of time in all the stations that I did. So it really set me up to study for the MD4 OSCEs. So I learned, okay, I need to work on my time. I need to work on using that 2-minute trigger time. I need to work on my note taking because I would be taking so many notes in the MD3 OSCE, like everything the patient said. Whereas in the MD4 OSCEs, I don't think I opened my notebook when I went to see the patient. I only used it beforehand. So if it's not a barrier, use it as a sort of, take it seriously, but not too seriously.
It's a trial run.
Yeah, it's a trial run, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, well, thanks a lot. Thank you, Kayley and Brendan, for interviewing. And thank you once again, Mohit, Jemma and Clara. And good luck to everyone listening. See ya.
Bye.
Good luck.